Dear students, ladies and gentlemen, welcome on our talk on music, on opera and more. We have again a very special guest tonight, a really truly special guest, Professor Francesco Izzo. Francesco is a professor of music at the University of Southampton, where he teaches a variety, a large variety of modules, I would say, about opera, about music theory, analysis. And his specialization, if I can say, the focus of his research is 19th century opera, Italian opera, and mainly concentrating on the works of Verdi. Regarding to this, he also is the general editor of the new critical edition of the Verdi operas by the Casa Ricordi, in collaboration with the university, how are they called again? In collaboration with Chicago University Press, of University of Chicago Press, that's it. And they are editing the complete works, the opera omnia of Verdi, in a new critical edition, both for the orchestra score, the orchestra material, and very, very important for us singers, the vocal scores, based on the autograph and with all the new material available until now. I'm sure that Professor Izzo will have a lot to say about that. Further, we should perhaps say that he is the author of a very interesting book, Laughter Between Two Revolutions. It's about the opera buffa in Italy around the 30s, 40s. And that he's not only a very, very knowledgeable professor, but that he's also a musician, and that he collaborates with famous, famous singers, with famous festivals. He is the part of the Verdi Festival in Parma, producing all kinds of interesting things. So there is too much to say about this, this dear friend of us. We know him since short because he has been doing a very interesting masterclass at Elisir d'Amore in the Conservatory of Maastricht. And in this short time, he has become a very, very, very dear friend. And so, Francesco, we are so happy, first, that you accepted it. Second, that you are here again with us. It's a professional pleasure and a personal one. Please to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Axel, for this really lovely introduction. And I second everything that you said about the friendship and the joy of being together. We're being together again. I have very fresh and very fond memories of my first visit to Maastricht, which was just before the pandemic struck at the end of January of 2020, when we spent 3 days together with your students working on Donizetti's L'Elisir d'Amore. And so I would like to thank you again for this lovely introduction, and I would like to thank my other dear friend Susanne Schimak. We haven't known each other for long, but what a team we have formed, and very special thanks to my very dear friend Miriam Pasquale, who was really pivotal in bringing me to Maastricht and introducing me to its wonderful voice faculty and its wonderful students. So I really wish I could be there again in person. I hope it's only postponed, but for now I am so happy to join you on Zoom and on the live streaming on Facebook for this conversation. The idea that I had is that we would talk about something that is relevant, I think, to all performers and all musicians. Our focus is going to be opera, so the music that I specialize in and that I concentrate on for most of my time on this planet. Yet I will try to make some points that again have a broader relevance, and I will welcome any questions from anyone, no matter how specific or how general. My goal is to speak to you for about an hour. And at one point, I will ask you to watch a YouTube video with a lovely recording of an aria by Donizetti. And Other than that, yes, I will speak to you. I have prepared a few slides, which I hope will be clear and legible. But by all means, I say to all of you, feel free to interject, to ask questions, make comments, and I rely on my dear friends who are supporting me via Zoom, so that if anything goes wrong with the technology, they will let me know. You have my phone number, send me a WhatsApp. If we get disconnected or anything tragic like that happens, I count on your support. But hopefully not. I've done all I could to set things up properly. So just to confirm, you hear me well and you see me well, and you see my PowerPoint slide? Brilliant. So let's get started. And let's start from a very basic question. What's in a score? In this slide, you see a few images, and I don't expect you to be able to read them, so don't worry about it. I will tell you what they are. I thought we would start from a very well-known piece, a canonic composition by Beethoven, his Symphony No. 3, the Eroica Symphony, so-called Eroica Symphony. What you see here is a variety of documents. At the top left, the famous title page from Beethoven's autograph manuscript in the composer's own hand. Then on below that, at the center, you have a page of one of the earliest editions of Beethoven's Third Symphony. And to the left of that, so bottom left, is a page from the main 19th century edition of Beethoven's works, one that is in the public domain and that continues to be reprinted and circulated to the present day. Finally, to the right, top and bottom, you have the covers, the title pages of two modern editions of Beethoven's Symphony No. 3. There are two editions that carry proudly the German word Urtext, and I trust you all know what it means. And they are basically modern editions, critical editions that rely on the original sources for this composition. So, very different materials, a very early edition, a late 19th century edition, two modern editions, and even Beethoven's own manuscript. Now, which of these is the Eroica Symphony? You probably know the answer better than I do. None of them. Okay, none of these documents does or can transmit the Eroica Symphony as it is. In order for the Eroica Symphony to come to life and in order to have some kind of meaning, it needs to be studied, it needs to be interpreted, and perhaps even performed. And none of these processes, none of these steps are simple ones. The score is an essential point of departure, and as Axel said, I spend much of my life doing critical editions of Verdi's operas. So I am a strong proponent that one needs to rely on editions that are reliable, that are well prepared, that are informative, and that give you choices as much as possible. But we need to be clear that the score is only the point of departure for any musical journey. And that ultimately, and this might seem like a paradox, it is possible to do a good performance starting from a bad score, and it is certainly possible and very easy actually to do a terrible performance starting from a good score. So that should be clear. That said, I'm going to talk a lot about how we need to know the score and understand how composers wrote and what they meant and so on. Okay, so this is just by way of an introduction to talk about what we want to explore together tonight. Music, again, is much more than what is written on a page. Notation, any notation, again, even Beethoven's own hand, even the most accurate of printed scores, is an allusion. It is a suggestion in, philosophically speaking, of what then needs to happen. And it is a form of communication, which has a prescriptive dimension and the descriptive dimension, but ultimately it is allusive, and it is expected that then those who use a score, whether they're studying it, analyzing it, or indeed performing it, playing and singing it, will do a lot of work in interpreting what the author and what the written source allude to. And ultimately, we must acknowledge that a great deal of what happens in a performance, a musical performance of any music, of any style, of any period, is actually not a reflection of what is written on a page of music. Okay, we may be very accurate, very precise, and yet there is always going to be a lot more that happens in a performance than is written on the page. I hope that we're clear on this point. I would like to look at an example just to look, just to explore the points that I've been making. And that example is an aria from L'Elisir d'Amore, since I had such a good time with all of you in Maastricht looking at this opera and working with fantastic voice students and their equally fantastic teachers. I would like to pick up this aria again. And here we have one of the earliest sources for this aria, which is the first edition of the piano vocal score, the piano vocal reduction of L'Elisir d'Amore, published by Ricordi in the early 1830s. And just to give you a taste of Donizetti's hand, here is the first few bars of the vocal part of this aria in Donizetti's hand. And it will be comforting to see that the notation of the vocal part in Donizetti's hand is reflected quite faithfully, not entirely, but quite faithfully in the printed score. So I trust you might know this piece, you will certainly be able to read it, but anyway, let me just try and play through this. Here it is. So that's the orchestral introduction, and on the final of the orchestra, before the fermata, the voice comes in, and what you get is prendi at base value. There is a fermata on prendi, okay? An indication that that note should be longer than its actual measured value. And there problems begin, of course, because if you pretend to be accurate, to be precise, to perform the music as written, a concept to which we're going to return, then you get to that point and actually you have to make decisions. What do you do with that note? You can make it very simple, just hold it a little bit longer and then resolve and the orchestra starts again. But you can make it much longer. Not only that, while you hold a note, those of you who are singers, but also those of you who play a string instrument or who play a wind instrument, understand very well that when you're holding a note, you can do a crescendo on it or a decrescendo, or both, crescendo and decrescendo, which is called messa di voce when you're working with this kind of repertoire. So something like okay, none of this is written. You have to make a decision about that note. And that's what I mean when I say the nature of musical notation is elusive. But there is a lot that I've done, even playing the piano, again, as dryly as I knew how, but I made decisions. I made decision about that ornament in the third bar. This could really be played as, for example, right? There are different ways of realizing an embellishment such as that one. And then, although I've tried to play in tempo, it comes natural that when you come to the end of a phrase, such as at bar 5 here, you can take a little bit of time. You have to take a little bit of time. You have to allow the phrase to breathe. Otherwise, it will feel mechanical, right? You don't want to do this. but you want it to have a shape. And you do that by inflecting the rhythm ever so slightly. And the last point that I'm going to make about this very simple passage, I chose one that was, very simple on purpose, is that when you get to that first sung note, that prendi with the fermata, you actually can make decisions that are even more radical than, for example, doing a messa di voce, holding the note and doing a crescendo and a decrescendo. You can add an ornament on that very note. So, for example, you can do this. Okay? Or you can do something more elaborate, such as and then off you go. And that would not be over-interpretation. It would not be using a freedom that doesn't belong to the performer. On the contrary, it would be a way of interpreting what Donizetti meant or might have meant by that fermata. And we will return to that point. What we're talking about here, when we look at a single note in a vocal line and how to realize it in performance, is bel canto, a term that today is commonly used to refer to the operas from early 19th century Italy that come before Verdi. So basically Rossini, Bellini, and Donizetti. The reality of this expression is both broader and more complex. The notion of bel canto is actually rooted in Baroque music and opera. So, anything that goes from the birth of opera, really, Monteverdi, for example, all the way through the late 17th century and early 18th century with composers such as Cavalli or Handel, and then into Mozart, and then into, indeed, the early 19th century, all of that has to do with bel canto. The expression bel canto in Italian, as I've written here in the slide, means literally beautiful singing or beautiful song. But more broadly, when we talk about bel canto style and bel canto opera, what we're talking about is a focus on the singing voice. Now, you could say that all of opera and all of vocal music indeed has a focus on the singing voice. But when we talk about bel canto opera, we mean something more. We mean that the voice is the essential vehicle. It is the essential channel through which emotions, feelings, and events are expressed. And the voice is, furthermore, at the same time, a vehicle of virtuosity. Bel canto opera, bottom line, is very difficult. Okay, there are a lot of notes, very often fast notes, semiquavers, demi-semiquavers, and there are runs and arpeggios and scales that cover, the whole range of the human voice, often 2 octaves or even more. And there are embellishments such as trills and turns that require a great deal of agility and flexibility. So that's bel canto too. There is the expressive component, but there is also the virtuosic component. Perhaps the most important thing about bel canto, and the reason, well, one of the reasons why I find this repertoire so fascinating and so meaningful for all musicians, is that the singer, whom is often referred to as a performer, actually has a very substantial creative input. Going back to the example I just gave you a moment ago from L'Elisir d'Amore, if you take that note and you start embellishing it, or anything else, you are actually becoming, one could argue, co-creator of the music. And some people would argue that you are taking freedoms, you're taking liberties that don't belong to you, because the composer didn't write those notes, and so why are you doing them? And that's a very legitimate question that needs to be addressed, and we will return to it repeatedly. But the creative input of the singer in performance is actually an essential aspect of bel canto. Indeed, the creative input of the singer in this repertoire goes back and down to the roots of the creative process. If you read the letters, the memoirs, all of the records that we have of composers like Donizetti, since we're talking about him, but also Bellini and Rossini, and also Verdi for that matter when he was young, we have countless indications that during the compositional process, it was very common for composers to work together with singers. One 19th century composer in 19th century Italy, Giovanni Pacini, wrote in his memoirs that the composer wrote music for singers the same way that a tailor makes clothes for their customers. There is this idea that the vocal part is custom made for a particular voice. And that is not simply that you have a soprano, you're writing for a soprano, you have a tenor, you're writing for a tenor. That goes without saying, but you're writing for a very specific voice. And moreover, typically the composer and the singer would sit in the same room during the compositional process, which overlapped with rehearsals, and would make decisions about what worked well for the singer. There is a wonderful story that is told by a famous French tenor in the 1830s, Gilbert Dupré, who was the first interpreter of one of Donizetti's most popular operas, Lucia di Lammermoor. And Gilbert Dupré sang the role of Edgardo, the principal tenor in that opera, and that opera famously ends with a very powerful death scene for the tenor who commits suicide on stage. And Dupré indicated that he told Donizetti how to write the cabaletta for that death scene. Namely, he suggested to Donizetti that when that cabaletta is sung for the second time, this is the theme. The first time the tenor sings it in full, like this. But the second time, since the tenor has already stabbed himself, he only sings fragments of the phrase. Like that, with a cello that carries the melody. Well, Gilbert Dupré indicated that he had this idea himself. Is it true? We don't know. We are never going to know for sure. Is it plausible? It certainly is. And if it is true, then we have a fantastic case of the singer who is a co-creator of the music, effectively. So, you know, we are talking about being unfair. We are talking about being unfair because when we say Donizetti's Lucia di Lammermoor, we are approximating. With opera, every time you open your mouth, you approximate anyway, because if you try to teach opera and it's convenient to say something, you just say it, such as Mozart's Don Giovanni or Verdi's La Traviata. But for a start, you should say Da Ponte and Mozart's Don Giovanni and Piave and Verdi's La Traviata. And then the singers need to be factored in too. Still today, by the way, we have opera composers, contemporary opera composers who function in the same way, who really collaborate closely with singers with astounding results. Are we all clear? Are there any questions, any interventions? Okay, if you are content, we can just go on and move on beyond the definition of bel canto and ask a few key questions, which have to do with relating to the score, because now we go back to the score, provided that we need to be familiar with the score and how it's written, okay? We need to be familiar, ideally, with how the composer himself notated the music. Because you see, even in the case of Edgardo's Cabaletta, Dupre might have had the idea of doing the Cabaletta in a certain way, but then Donizetti wrote it in his own hand. And so that's our starting point. That can only be our starting point. But when we start, we shouldn't look at the score and think that it gives us all the answers. Actually, we should question the score and ask 3 key questions about it. So first of all, the letter. Okay, what did the composer write? It might seem obvious, but we really need to know that Donizetti really wrote that fermata. And I think it's really useful to know that if you look at the autograph manuscript that I showed you, that fermata is quite large. In the early 19th century, notation in Italian opera, actually fermatas have a different meaning depending on their size and how they're placed specifically on one note or maybe over a half a bar or even entire bar of music. So having that kind of information is very important. But that's only our point of departure, because then there's the second question, the intention. The composer wrote something, but what did they really mean to write? We must remember that Rossini, Bellini, Donizetti, and even Verdi in the early years of his career were working against very tight deadlines. They were under time pressure all the time. And therefore, their notation is not necessarily accurate. Sometimes they write a wrong note. Don't we all? I mean, we all make mistakes. Just look at your own WhatsApp and see how many typos you've put into the messages that you've sent today. It's frightening. But then it's not. Our goal is to communicate. And when we send a message to a friend with whom we want to exchange a musical opinion, or maybe have dinner when the COVID regulations allow, we don't worry about the typing errors because our intention will be clear. Okay, so if instead of writing dinner, we write diner with a single N, that's a very different word in English, but the context will make it clear that we mean dinner. Similarly, with notation in early 19th century Italian opera, sometimes we deal with things that are written incompletely, that are not notated carefully. One very common example is that a composer will write a curvy line, then the pen will run dry, and so there is no dot underneath. And then what is actually a fermata will be mistaken for a slur. Okay, so the slur might be the letter, but the intention is actually the fermata. You need to have the insight and to have the education, to have the historical awareness to figure out what the composer meant. And finally, perhaps most important, what did they mean? And here we go back to the example that I just gave you of prendi per me sei libero and that first note. What does that fermata mean? Does it mean hold the note? Does it mean hold the note and do a messa di voce? Does it mean hold the note and do an embellishment? Well, very often it means all of the above, because the composer writes in a way that empowers the performer to make decisions. We can be fairly sure that when Donizetti wrote that fermata, he didn't have one single specific effect in mind, but he had a range of possibilities in mind. And that's what he meant to convey to the performer. Knowing that different performers would make different decisions about that note. So in dealing with that note and with the hypothesis, with the possibility of adding ornamentation to that note, we are entering one of the crucial areas of bel canto aesthetics and bel canto technique, for that matter, because composers sometimes write very elaborate passages themselves. If you look at the same aria or other pieces by the same composer or other composers whom I have already named, you will find the really detailed and elaborate vocal writing. But that doesn't mean that the composer is only intending to have elaborate passages when they write them down. On the contrary, the composer writing things down is an indication of things that the singer can do when things are not written down. Am I making sense? I said that in a little bit of a convoluted way. Sorry about that. It's late in the day. But just to say it again, there are two levels. There are the embellishments, the coloratura, the flourishes, the complicated passages that the composer writes themselves. And then there are places, contexts, and signs, such as a big fermata, that suggest to the singer that they can take over to the extent that they see fit, and depending on dramatic context, on characterization, and so on and so forth. But ornamentation is a key aspect of the repertoire that we're discussing right now. And it is the key aspect of a lot of other repertoires. I've already said that I find it fascinating that if we study bel canto opera, we really study the role of the performer. But here we might as well be talking about jazz. We might as well be talking about interpreting 17th century keyboard music, or even 19th century lieder, because we have manuscripts, an abundance of them, with ornamentation for Schubert's lieder. I don't like it because I grew up in a certain aesthetic context, but that's what happened, and there is absolutely no reason why we should categorically deny the use of ornamentation in Schubert's lieder. We have to be careful with it. Maybe we don't want to treat a Schubert lied the same way that we treat the Rossini aria, but we must be open-minded about how even Schubert wrote the letter, wrote down certain notes and expressive markings and phrasing markings and so on, but also had intentions and had meaning in what he wrote, including giving the performer some freedom. So going back to bel canto, we should remember that bel canto empowers singers in various contexts and to various degrees. When you deal with a bel canto number, with a bel canto aria, for example, such as the one for Adina in the final act of L'Elisir d'Amore, typically the number is divided into different sections that have very different musical character. There is recitative, almost invariably, which may be just for a single character or even involve dialogue or interaction between different voices or one singer and the chorus. Then there is a slow movement, which is often referred to as the cantabile, for the simple reason that it is tuneful, that it is indeed cantabile. And then after that, there is a cabaletta, which is faster and usually more virtuosic, although there are exceptions to that rule, and which concludes the number. And in each of these segments of a basic number in a bel canto opera, it is possible and actually desirable to introduce ornamentation. And here we raise the question of why. Why, if we accept, you don't have to agree with me, by the way, but you know, I'm speaking from historical record, so I'm quite confident about what I'm saying. If you accept what I say, that the intention and the meaning of a composer's notation is to empower the performer, then we need to ask why do they do that? And we need to explain that. You know, when you do things in music, all of you, you know, all of us who are musicians, you do them for a reason. It may be a matter of instinct, of course, because when you are experienced, when you are musical, when you are in the spur of the moment, you may make wonderful decisions without really thinking about them. But even when you're not thinking, there are still reasons behind what you do. And here I've just enumerated a few reasons why ornamentation is appropriate, desirable, effective in opera of this time. One is virtuosity, and we should feel no shame for it. Bel canto is beautiful and appealing, very much like jazz, very much like keyboard music of the Baroque period, because the performer does something very special. Okay, because the performer has the ability of surprising us and dazzling us, of blowing our socks away with their technical abilities. So let's not discard virtuosity. Virtuosity is often opposed, censored, critiqued, or criticized, but it is actually essential in the operatic experience for composers like Donizetti or Rossini or Bellini or Verdi. And that's to be kept in mind. Then there is variety, and we'll talk more about this. Italian opera of this period, but also of earlier periods, think of opera seria from the early 18th century, for example, is based on a great deal of repetition, where an individual phrase or melodic gesture, but also an entire section, for example, in the capo arias, is repeated. Then monotony is always lurking, and you don't want monotony ever. If you're a performer and you become monotonous, then there is another word for it, and it's boring, and you don't want that. You don't want predictability, but you want variety. So when there is a repetition, the notation is what it is, but the meaning of that notation is that in the repetition, something needs to change. And we'll talk about how you may change or repeat either of a short segment of music or even of an entire section. Then there is expression. Does the passage you're singing express joy or pain? Does it express rage or fear? Are you mourning the death of another character, or are you about to get married? Are you royalty, or are you a humble character? All of these are questions whose answer might inform the way in which you provide ornamentation in a given passage of music. And hand in hand with this goes characterization and drama, of course. Sometimes you make decisions about ornamentation that are not local, they're not related to a specific passage, but have to do with characterizing an entire role. What will my character, your character, Axel, or your character, Susanna, or your character to any of the singers who are listening out there, what does that character stand for? What kind of ornamentation will be effective in making them coherent, as well as appealing and gripping? So those are the reasons why we do ornamentation. Now let's talk about how we do ornamentation and look at some source materials from the early to mid 19th century. I see that there is something in the chat. Oh, wait, this is not for me, I suppose. Types of intervention. Mechanical substitutions, that's one of them. There are places and melodic gestures where conventionally you need to change at least a note, because that's what the composer means. So quite literally what I'm saying is that if the composer writes this, what they actually mean is this. And we'll look at practical examples in a moment. Then puntature, some of the most beloved changes that one makes in a score, where you change a note. Very often you have a note and you substitute a higher note for it. So for example, at the end of Violetta's aria, at the end of Act 1 of La Traviata, very famously, many sopranos add a high E flat. So instead of ending like this, something like that, they end. All right, that's a puntatura. Then diminutions, where instead of having one note, you diminish its value and you multiply the number of notes. So if you have this, you can change it to, and that's a diminution. Cadenzas are places where basically the orchestra stops and the voice is given free rein. Sometimes a cadenza is written out, and we may decide to sing what the composer wrote. Sometimes what the composer wrote is merely a suggestion or a point of departure. Sometimes the composer wrote no cadenza at all, and then we need to provide one. Otherwise, we betray the composer. And then, even if we don't do anything with the notes, such as with appoggiaturas, puntature, diminutions, and cadenzas, we still have the freedom to ornament in a broader sense by introducing rhythmic changes, so speeding up, slowing down, introducing changes in dynamics where we sing a passage forte, and then we sing it again piano, or vice versa, and even making modifications in the phrasing. So displacing or replacing breathing points, for instance. So all of these 7 points fit into, belong in the realm of ornamentation. And the scores of Rossini, Bellini, Donizetti, and Verdi give us a lot of indications of where such interventions may take place. But we also have treatises. And I would like to talk a little bit about treatises now by looking at the most influential singing treatise of the 19th century, the treatise by Manuel Garcia Jr., who wrote this very substantial singing treatise in 2 parts, which talks a lot about vocal technique, but also talks about style, including ornamentation. And Garcia gives us examples of the types of ornamentation that I've been describing. So here, let's look at a brief passage from the aria or the recitative for Assur in Act 2 of Semiramide. What Rossini writes is this: folle deliro. Okay? But if you look at the top stave on the slide, what Rossini means, what this notation means, is that the first of the 2 A flats on the downbeat of the second bar needs to be changed. That's what we call a prosodic appoggiatura. Prosodic because it goes with the accent in the poetry. And what Garcia tells us is that this should be sung as chi folle deliro. So not deliro, but deliro. Furthermore, Garcia is indicating that the value of the first note should be extended so that you really lean on the syllable that is accented. So it's not just a matter of providing a dissonance which accentuates the text, but even of making it last a little bit longer. Garcia is very clear that this is not an option, okay? It's not a suggestion. It's not, up to you. This is what you must do. And there is another thing that Garcia writes in this slide. I have not highlighted here, but you can see that for the accompaniment, Garcia writes après le chant, which means after the singing. Very important and very difficult point to address when you are in rehearsal nowadays, because not all conductors agree to this. But what Garcia says is that since the rhythm of the recitative becomes flexible, partly due to the use of the prosodic appoggiatura, the orchestra shouldn't play at all until the vocal phrase is finished. So it should be folle deliro, and then, okay, it shouldn't be deliro. Very often you will hear what I just demonstrated with the orchestra that comes in, restricting the freedom of the singer, often producing poor ensemble, to be frank. But today we obsess with rhythm for recitatives, and as I will tell you in a little bit, that really shouldn't be the case. Puntature, let me give you a couple of examples of puntature, which I love. Here we have a passage also from Rossini. This is his first great success, Tancredi. And at the end of this system, of this phrase, you can see that Rossini writes, and it's the top line, a respirarmi in seno. All right? But one way to realize this, and this is an option, this is not a requirement. Prosodic appoggiaturas are mechanical, they need to happen. But here there is the suggestion that the passage could be a respirarmi in seno. Okay? Just going up a fifth. depending on who is singing, depending on her voice type, this may be a very good choice or not. Note that this example is also recommending holding the puntatura. Okay, usually puntaturas go hand in hand with rhythmic freedom. And here we have another example of puntatura, which I love because it's a rare instance of a puntatura where the voice goes down and not up. We are back to Assur's scena in Semiramide, and at the bottom you can see what Rossini wrote. La si discende. And the suggestion is that this becomes a big drop, down an octave, as a matter of fact. So, la si discende, si discende. I'm not a bass. I'm nothing actually, but that's why I have the piano. So, la si discende. Now, this is a very interesting example of how an ornament can be intelligent, not only musical, but also dramatic. The words here says that that way you can descend into the tomb of Nino, the murdered king of Babylon. So this idea of descending into the grave is expressed quite beautifully by pushing the bass's voice down an octave. Okay, the word discende means to descend, and so the voice descends, it drops down an octave. It makes very good sense. Next example, oh, this is the same one as before, so never mind. Let's talk about diminutions. Diminutions can happen in all sorts of contexts, and I love this little chart because it's like a, you know, when you buy furniture from IKEA and you have to assemble it, you get instructions. Those are not very clear, but this is the same thing. You know, how do you put together a line, a melodic line, which is merely written as, and the answer is that this can become or and it goes on and on. Okay? Or it's really good to do it at the piano as well, especially when you don't practice like me. Once you get to the semiquavers, it's just keeps things in motion. So here is how you do diminutions. In a cadential passage such as this one, where you basically have, you know, 1 5 1 4 5 5 1, using diminutions provides variety, as I was saying before. The focus shifts away from the harmony, which is predictable, formulaic, and towards the voice, which becomes fun, because you don't know what the next 2 bars are going to bring when there is a repeat of the same cadential figure. Rhythmic changes. I'd like to talk about this because now we are going to deal very comfortably with a passage where we don't change the notes. This is one of my favorite examples. There is, in Lucia di Lammermoor, an opera we've mentioned previously, the cabaletta that the soprano sings at the end of her entrance aria. So we're in Act 1 and she's thinking about her love and how happy she is when she sees him. And it is understandably a rather virtuosic cabaletta. That's what happens. I would like to concentrate in particular on the middle 2 bars of this example. Now, traditionally, and this is a word that is going to become increasingly important for us in the next 10, 15 minutes, traditionally, what we do with this passage is we slow down massively, okay? Like this. Okay, half the speed, and then you pick up again from, and so, all right? Why would we do that? The answer is tradition. Most sopranos who have left recordings of this piece do that. And so we do it too. And we do it not only the second time that we do the cabaletta, but the first time as well. And I'm not saying that this is wrong, but it's something worth thinking about. This is one of those rare places where if I'm coaching or advising, consulting for performance, I will say, please do this in tempo, because it is so rare to hear it literally, and frankly, very effective musically. I think that it's quite beautiful to have. And that makes the rhythmic freedom the second time much more exciting, much more surprising. But rhythmic change there can happen, whether we do it the first time or the second time, whether we do what tradition dictates or whether we do something else, that's a different story, but it is possible to do it, to alter the rhythm. Okay? So this is just a quick overview of things that can happen and the kinds of documentation or lack thereof that we may have. And now, approaching the conclusive part of our conversation, let's talk about the interpretive approaches that stem from the materials and ideas that I've shared with you so far. I'm proposing three here: literal, tradition, creative, traditional and creative. Literal is when you aim to sing things as they are written. In the 1960s and 70s, and especially 70s and 80s, we started thinking that Rossini and Bellini and Donizetti needed to be taken seriously, which is true. And we thought that in so doing, we needed to get rid of all of the arbitrary alterations, all of the traditional ornamentation that singers had been using for decades, and just sing the music as written, come scritto in Italian. Very famous and fantastic conductors, including Claudio Abbado and Riccardo Muti, took this approach at certain points in their careers. Muti recently, or not so recently, then became much more flexible about such matters. But there was this idea that if you did what a composer composed, then you needed to do everything as it had been written on the page. So basically taking the letter, but not the intention or the meaning. At the other end of our spectrum, we have traditional. We don't sing things as they're written, but we sing them as they are taught. And, of course, no offense to those who are present here, all of us teach things in a certain way, including me. Oh, here, the cadenza at the end of Nemorino's Romanza in L'Elisir d'Amore, this is what you do. Doesn't matter that the written page says something else. Doesn't matter that you may come up with something that is your own, but just it's traditional. Caruso did this, Pavarotti did this, Callas did this. And I could go on and give you names of hundreds of singers, and we would be here until midnight. It would be boring. But I could do that, and Axel knows that, Miriam knows that, Susanna knows that, all of us know that it is actually possible to say, oh, just do what Beverly Sills did. Fine. Why not? I mean, it's not that Beverly Sills did something wrong, but it's sometimes a little bit of a shortcut. Shortcuts are useful, especially if a performance is coming up next week and you only have 2 minutes to rehearse and agree certain details with the conductor. Then tradition is very helpful and we should never reject it. But tradition is a limited, narrow perspective, like a very narrow window that lets a little bit of light filter through, but only a little bit, of what was really the nature of bel canto performance in the 19th century, and that is creativity. The idea that when we find a fermata, when we find a repetition of a passage, when we find something that doesn't quite sit well with our voice, then we use our creativity, which must be informed by our education, our culture, our knowledge and understanding of the repertoire, but we use our creativity to, one, make a passage work well for us, for our voices, and two, to make it sound novel and exciting. I think it's very problematic in an art form that is already facing big challenges, all the more so in the light of the COVID-19 pandemic and what it is doing to opera houses, opera companies. It's very problematic when we restrict our horizons. When we go to a performance of Lucia di Lammermoor or L'Elisir d'Amore, expecting that things are going to be either literal, come scritto, or traditional, as they have been taught to us, broadly speaking, by recordings as well as by vocal coaches and voice singers and so on. And I feel that creativity is really what we should free up as much as possible. Because if we accept that performers can actually have an active role and surprise us every single time, the same way that many jazz musicians do today, of course, in a different style, in different manners, but the concept is the same, then every performance has the potential to become truly gripping, truly novel. And if you ask me, I prefer a performance that goes a little bit overboard, where maybe I don't agree with the sorts of interventions that are made, but at least I see that there is an effort and that I'm hearing an opera in a way that I've never heard it before. Believe me, it happens. It's possible, and it's very, very exciting. So at this point, we can take two routes. Are we happy? I'm going to ask my wonderful hosts. Is it acceptable to keep going for, say, another 20, 25 minutes?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Please do. We are drinking your words.
Okay, then we'll continue and we'll have a look at what one can do with another aria by Donizetti. So what I suggest we do actually is that I'm going to skip the bits about recitative because I can summarize them and I can even send those passages to you afterwards. But I would like all of us to take about 8 or 9 minutes, let's say 10, so we can stretch our legs, get a sip of water, whatever it is. And I would like us to listen to this recording by tenor Juan Diego Flores, one of today's leading performers. I will tell you right away that I mean neither to say that this performance is perfect, nor to say that I don't like it, because I love it and because I don't think it's perfect. Okay? But I would like you to listen to this carefully. So now my friends on the ground in Maastricht are going to share with you a PDF of the score for this aria, and I'm going to see if I can pop this link. Whoops. If I can pop the link into the chat so that you can just click on it, go on YouTube and listen to this recording. Bear with me, I'm technologically challenged, as I said at the beginning of this. Chat. Okay, here comes the link. So it's now 8:57 in Central Europe, and we reconvene 10 minutes after 8, and all of you will have listened to this piece already. I'm simply going to turn off my camera. Rest assured that I'm not going far, but I am going to get a glass of water. Have fun.
I'm going to try to share the video for the people that are following the thing online.
Trägst du gerade einen BH? Hast du schon mal so einen BH gesehen?
Sorry, it's an advertisement, of course, when you go to YouTube.
dallo Dio cacciato, da tutti abbandonato. Mi restava un amico e un coperto nemico discopro in lui, che ad anni miei congiura perder Norina. Oddio, ben feci a lei d'esprimere in un foglio i sensi miei. Ora in altra contrada i giorni gravi a trascinar si cercherò lontana terra dove gemer sconosciuto la vivrò col cuore in guerra deplorando il ben perduto. Quale sorte a me nemica ne frapposi molti e molti potranno, dolce amica, dal mio cuore cancellar, molti potranno dal mio cuore cancellar, molti potranno, dolce amica, dal mio cuore cancellar. Se fia che ad altro getto tu rivolga un giorno il cuore, se mai fia che un uomo affetto spenga in te l'antico ardore, non temer che un'infelice te spergiura accusi al ciel. Se tu sei ben mio felice, sarà pago il tuo fedel, sarà pago il tuo fedel, sarà pago il tuo fedel. Cercherò lontana terra, dove gemer sconosciuto. Sì,
Hello, hello.
Entdecken Sie den Renault Zoe E-Tech mit bis zu 395 Kilometern rein elektrischer Reichweite und innovativem Design. Den Renault Zoe E-Tech gibt es jetzt mit 10.000 € Elektrobonus. Schon ab 99 € monatlich. Bei allen teilnehmenden Renault-Partnern.
Stop.
It's replaying.
Ah.
Okay, now it's gone.
Good.
Okay, looks like we're all back, and I hope that you've enjoyed yourselves. As I said, before we listened to this, it's a performance I like a lot, that I admire, and I think it does a lot of things that are absolutely right stylistically. And it also there are also things that it doesn't do. Let me begin with one note of caution. The big danger when you have a performance like this by an internationally renowned performer, very influential, easily accessible on YouTube, is that it becomes tradition, what I was saying before. And that when a talented young tenor, such as the two with whom I worked last year for L'Élysée d'Amour in Maastricht, will either be told by a coach or a teacher, I know that it's not the case of the people who are here, but will be told, oh, just do the same embellishments that Juan Diego does. That it's actually not sensible to do that, and you guys know this, but there are a lot of people who don't. And the other danger, much more real, is that the student themselves, the young artist, the aspiring star, will think, oh, if I do everything that Juan Diego Flores does, I'm going to be famous. And usually it's the exact opposite, that if you do the same things that Juan Diego does, you ruin your voice, and then you will never have a career. So let's start from the end, the high D flat. Flores is a tenor who is famous among many other things because he has very good high notes. And so he displays one at the end. That's a puntatura, right? So instead of singing Fidel, sings a right? He goes up. Puntatura, perfectly fine to do that. It saddens me, however, when an artistic director or the jury of a competition will make a decision regarding which tenor should be rewarded or given a prize or hired to do the role of Ernesto merely on the basis of that note. That note is an option, but there are choices, and that's why we need to look at the score and think, okay, come scritto is limiting, but tradition is also limiting. Creativity is in between. What voice do you have? Are you tired? What else have you done previously to earn the applause? Do you need the high note? Does it add anything at that point? These are the sorts of questions that need to be asked. Juan Diego does a fantastic job at adding a wealth of ornaments in the cabaletta, and that's a very good thing to do. And he also does a very good job at introducing all of the prosodic appoggiaturas in the recitative. You will have noticed that whenever there are those two notes on the downbeat, he inflects the first one and puts it either a whole tone or a semitone higher, so that you have the dissonance, you have the expressive factor, and you have a really good effect. But there are also things that can be done differently, not because he's wrong and I'm right, that must be absolutely clear, but just because, as I was saying about the final note, there are options. So I've played a little bit with this aria, and I've written down a few things that I'm going to share with you, just as where is it? This is probably the right file. I hope it is. Yes. Okay, can you see the score on your screen? Okay, so I've played around with this recitative. Recitatives are formulaic very often. They're written in common time, 4/4, and if you read the treatise by Garcia, but also a treatise by Luigi Lablache, which I was going to show you, because it's interesting, but because Luigi Lablache was the first Don Pasquale, they will tell you invariably that the rhythm of recitative should come from the word, not from the notation. So don't obsess about having to do a recitative in tempo. The performance by Flores shows a good deal of rhythmic flexibility, but maybe more can be done. And one needs to capitalize, I think, on little details in the composer's notation. The way this recitative begins, Axel knows very well, Susanne knows very well, many of you know this very well, is that very long note at the beginning. Recitatives don't frequently begin like that.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, if you have a note like that, where this character, Ernesto, feels very sorry for himself, his uncle has disowned him, he's going to lose his inheritance, he's going to lose his girlfriend, he's going to travel to America and just forget everything about the life that he had before. So he feels very sorry for himself. And the first words are, povero Ernesto, poor Ernesto. Well, that first note can really open up a whole world, right? And I think that by leaning on that note, Donizetti, who writes the minim, is already giving us an indication of something that could be, in my opinion, much more expressive. So here I'm suggesting, for example, Ernesto, just hold that note, do a crescendo, do a diminuendo. It's not a difficult note for any tenor, I would say. Could contradict me if I'm wrong, but that's really where you can make a really good impression right at the beginning of a piece. It's a good attention getter. Difficult because you come right after the trumpet solo, which is a magnificent tune, which you then get to sing yourself as a tenor. But at that point, you need to get all of the attention on you, and that first note is just such a great opportunity. I've also suggested in the same system some slight rhythmic changes, and I've written down the prosodic appoggiaturas where needed. But I'm now going to fast forward to the end of this recitative, where I think that there is an opportunity. Juan Diego sings basically the notes that Donizetti writes, and does a fantastic job with that. Let's think about the words. Ernesto is talking about dragging his own life, because life becomes a weight. So let's, go far away and just drag my sad days with me. And Donizetti, who was very sensitive, very perceptive of these aspects of the poetry, writes a line that drags, right? A descending line. Sorry, too high. Okay, and that's what Juan Diego sings, taking rhythmic freedom and beautifully inflecting the phrasing. What I'm suggesting here is that if you have the high notes, you can make this idea of dragging even more explicit by adding some notes. So here I'm providing diminutions. Okay, it's a possibility. You don't have to do this. There's a million other things that you can do there. But if a tenor has a great D flat that they can sing at the end of the cabaletta, then maybe they can also invest in doing something more elaborate at the end of the recitative. And you can see that if you do that, maybe you run out of breath. So I'm suggesting just a semi-quaver rest, right? A 16th rest. So that after you've done, you can catch your breath. Siva, and then on Si Vada, you can even do a messa di voce and fill in the gap, the descending fourth with passing notes. That's what I'm suggesting as an alternative. Turning to the cantabile, just a few thoughts here. We have the typical, let me just get it on the score on the piano so that I can read it more easily and I don't have to twist my neck too much. you have the typical structure of a cantabile, which consists of 4-bar phrases. Okay, so you have the first phrase, which corresponds to 2 lines of poetry, and that is 4 bars of music. So you've heard this repeatedly at this point. And then you get the same phrase. Now, my question is whether the second time that the same phrase is sung, it could be changed just so slightly. I'm not saying that you should go crazy with diminutions and start doing semiquavers. It would not be suited to the pathos, the sentimental style of the melody. But could you, for example, do providing an appoggiatura here on this downbeat, right? We're talking about war there. That's the word guerra. I think that when there is guerra, there is dissonance. And so I would, I would support making such a decision. Very often, leading bel canto singers today limit their ornamentation to the caballettas. And that's a missed opportunity. It does not reflect historical record, which is not a good reason to provide ornamentation everywhere, but it also compromises or limits some expressive opportunities that stem from the repetitions in the music, but also from different words. Sometimes you can use little formulaic things. Here at the end of this phrase, I'm suggesting providing a turn. That's something that early 20th century singers did a lot, and they learned from people who, well, they didn't know Donizetti, but they have fewer degrees of separation than we do. And then we come to the end of the cantabile. This is an interesting place, I think, where Donizetti writes a passage which is suggestive of a cadenza, but is not really a cadenza. Or dal mio cuore cancellar. Note that there is a fermata. I don't have Donizetti's autograph score handy. My guess would be that that fermata is probably much larger. So this is a place where you could have a more complex cadenza. I haven't suggested one, but I'm just flagging out that it is possible to provide one. Then, moving on to the cabaletta, I think that it's fine to sing it as written the first time through. So I've provided nothing here, but there is one spot where I ache every time that singers don't do something with it. And that spot, I can see Axel nodding because he knows what I'm heading for. That spot is at the end of the retransition, just before you pick up the repeat of the cabaletta. Donizetti gives us a very nice suggestion here, which is what Juan Diego sings. And so on, right? Lovely. Start on the dominant, go up by step, introduce a couple of chromatic notes, and then you get to the melody, you get to the cabaletta. Right? That's what Donizetti himself writes. But we need to understand that the purpose of that notation is not prescriptive, it is allusive. Going back to what I said before. It is a suggestion of what one can do to lead into the repeat of the cabaletta. You want to sing what Donizetti wrote? Fine. Not saying, I cannot stress this enough, that Juan Diego did something wrong. I'm saying that you can do other things as well. And so here I just made 2 quick suggestions. One is, okay, so sort of going a little bit higher and then descending by half steps, so chromatically to the E natural. Not that different from what Donizetti does, just a little bit more extended. And then I've made a different suggestion for those tenors who want to sing the high notes and have an abundance of them. If you do something like that, here I've merely suggested a B flat. There are ways that you could go up to C if you wanted to. If you do something like that and it's really dazzling, then there will be less pressure to do the big high note at the end. One reality of bel canto opera is that the focus is not on the last note. That's something that comes later. It comes with Verismo primarily. If you look at Puccini's arias, there is a high note either at the very end or very close to the very end. Okay. Perché, signor, and then perché me ne rimuneri così, the end. And Puccini writes like that. But Rossini doesn't, Donizetti doesn't, Bellini doesn't, and Verdi doesn't, for that matter. So the emphasis can be shifted back. You can have more points of attention, you can have more climaxes, so to speak, and then the need to have the big flashy thing at the very end decreases. The audience will be attentive and involved throughout. They're not just sit there lazily. They're not just going to sit there lazily in their chairs waiting for the final D flat. But they know that there are all of these different places, the end of the recitative, the end of the cantabile, the retransition before you pick up the cabaletta again. Those are all places where you can use the creativity, where you can do something that is neither come scritto nor traditional, neither what Donizetti wrote, nor what your favorite tenor from the early 20th century or the mid 20th century or even the early 21st century does. Okay, so basically after an hour and 25 minutes, I'm ready to conclude and just to tell you, creativity is not only a key to understanding this repertoire historically, but also a way to unlock the potential for this repertoire to be truly engaging and novel today. And I think there is a lot of work to do and a lot of thinking to do, whether or not you're a bel canto singer, whether or not you're a singer at all, because a lot of what I've said, I think, can be transferred to other instruments and other repertoires, and the excitement then is really never ending. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Francesco. Is my mic on? It is. I see we have quite a lot of people following us on the live stream, so I don't know, Miriam.
Hi to everyone.
Yeah, we have a question in the chat that actually it was a more generalistic question. It's a question from Leonor. Maybe Leonor, you can switch on your camera. And she wrote, in your opinion, which are the most important technical abilities that a singer needs to have to sing bel canto?
All of them.
How much time?
I think that's another masterclass. But
the bel canto voice can have no limits, really. That said, no, it's a fabulous question, of course. That said, we need to, I think that the best qualities in your voice are the ones that are already there and that you can hone and strengthen. If you have great trills already, those are probably going to be a fantastic asset. And if you don't have great trills, you have to learn them. The trill is probably, I don't know, Axel, if you agree, is probably one of those key things
I do.
that you should work on, because it means breath control, it means flexibility, it means also having your vibrato in check. And we could, yeah, that's another masterclass, really. And probably Axel should give it, not me. But the best asset technically is the one that you already have. If you can do leaps really well, an octave leap, think Marilyn Horne to talk about one of the historic amazing bel canto singers from the late 20th century. She could do leaps. They just came easy to her. She could do lots of other things too. But I would not advocate that all singers need to do leaps like she does.
Mhm.
Great.
Francesco, this is an important point, which Joan Sutherland also in masterclasses always would point out. If she had singers, of course, singing her repertoire for her and doing the Semiramide with the Sutherland puntature and doing the Lucia with the Sutherland things. And she would always say, why are you doing what was written for me? You should do what is written for you, or you should write it yourself. And find the specificity, is that a word in English?
Yes.
That suits your voice and show that off.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's really the point. And one thing that was very special about Sutherland is that she really made a point of using her own ornamentation. When she stepped in to do Lucia instead of Callas, she did her own things. She didn't do Callas's cadenzas and embellishments.
And it's amazing how, if you see how she arranged the role of Semiramide to her voice.
Yeah.
That she was sort of a canon for Semiramide, which is quite far from the written score.
Very far, absolutely. Very far. But if you do Semiramide, either you have the voice that Isabella Colbran had, and she was basically a high mezzo, believe it or not. And today, one singer that has approached it with that kind of baggage is Joyce Di Donato. But if you have Sutherland's voice, then you sing Semiramide as Sutherland, and you always need to negotiate with the notation and with its allusive nature. Not rewrite the part completely. I would never advocate that, but really make it function, make it work. So that's a huge question, of course. But what are the biggest gifts? You already have them in a way.
I have a question, if I can. I know our guests and our students have preference, but I'm very curious about that. You have been talking about creativity a lot, and you have been encouraging the young singers, write your own ornamentations, dare to deviate from come scritto and from tradition. And even this is not taking place in the framework of the Conservatory, but here we are, 3 teachers of Conservatory. I would like to know your point of view about how could we support our students in unblocking this creativity. Because when I'm looking at the score, I'm like, okay, maybe minimum knowledge of harmony is needed, but maybe we don't need to study the whole treaty of harmony. Maybe something more specific for them. Or how do you see this kind of knowledge and this kind of skills being trained in the framework of a conservatory?
That's a fabulous question, and you're putting your finger very intelligently on a sore spot. That in a conservatory, rightly, we study a lot of music, a lot of different repertoires, different languages, and we're always under pressure, justly, to learn new repertoire, to prepare a new recital, to get ready for a new exam, maybe to do an audition or a competition in the meantime. So there is the time factor. And a lot of what I say, and I don't say it to brag or to take credit, but it takes a lot of years of studying this repertoire and living with it so that you really make it your own. And there is no real shortcut. There are a few shortcuts, however, and those all have to do with concentrating on key spots. That's why in this brief discussion of Ernesto's aria, I've concentrated on the cadenza at the end of the cantabile, the end of the recitative, the reprise of the cabaletta, as places where it's quite easy to unleash your creativity because the orchestra stops. When the orchestra stops, you're really in an easier place, because then they've just got to wait for you. And as long as you stay on the dominant, which is usually where you are, or you're resolving an imperfect cadence in the case of the end of a recitative, then you can really be experimental. And I'd rather you be experimental and then tell you, well, that's really, you've really gone too far on the wild side, than just sit here and hear you do a solfège exercise and simply read through the score.
Yeah. I
see Eva out there who I tortured as Adina last year, so she's talking about. And you just need to be brave, and you need to make mistakes.
May I add or ask or join to Miriam's question and to what you just said? One of the most striking things you said repeatedly, creativity is the word, which came, quite unexpected, because bel canto, if we just speak in cliché, bel canto is equaled to tradition. However, innovation in traditional repertoire, in bel canto repertoire, comes out of creativity. Now, for us as educators, or maybe I should ask, because Axel, I know, is a specialist in bel canto, sometimes tradition seems to cut off the growth of creativity. As we are under constant time pressure, and I see my friend Nancy Hayashibara, who's joining us from Los Angeles, nodding, wonderful pianist and coach, seems to cut off any attempt of creativity on the side of the student. So what does it mean for us as educators? Obviously, we need to embrace the idea of creativity sometimes equaling, what shall I say, making mistakes, failing, first attempt in learning to fail, right? What would you advise somebody like me, who's not a bel canto specialist, obviously, in terms of allowing my students to go with the creativity they might be feeling, to encourage that and to defend them from the attacks of the traditionalists who claim that every evening they speak to the composer and they know exactly how it should be performed and what is the correct tempo, and this is the tonality and you cannot do this. Very complex thing to ask. Maybe not. Maybe it's a very simple answer.
No, I don't think there is a simple answer. And here, I feel your pain and I share it. And it is the pain of the singing profession, which I really think it's the hardest job in the world. I get so angry when people say, oh, it's not rocket science, because rocket science is actually very easy.
Francesco,
it doesn't take that much of an effort to put a satellite into an orbit around the Earth. It's very, very simple. You just have to do a lot of calculations and do them right. Doing a cadenza, believe me, is conceptually much more complicated.
Now we have to get married, because this is the second time you're saying something wonderful like this. I don't see, what do I need to do to propose to you? No, but yeah, okay.
Well, there's a little bit of a problem there, but it's the 21st century. I'm sure we can find a way.
I'm going for the ring tomorrow, I promise. Okay.
And we haven't even had a drink yet.
But I don't need a drink to be no. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Now there is something perhaps to be added, because you should not think of the creativity in order of extra virtuosity. Of course, very often it will be, if it's a cabaletta, it will be finding different types of coloratura, making puntature and all these kind of things. But I think that you can trigger the freedom and the creativity of a student by very simple things by bel canto composers, because the music basically musically and harmonically is so extremely simple, 1-4-5, We might get to switch to a minor once in a while, or have a Napolitan chord, but there is nothing sensational going on during the arias. So the creativity is lying in the sound itself, in the quality of a sound, something you will need less, or you will need in a different way when you do a Schubert song or a Schumann song. But since the music is helping you more there, you can rely on doing come scritto, and it will be, if you do come scritto, it will already be very nice. So if you train young singers in the freedom and expressivity of the simple lines, like in Vagaluna, and to make a line interesting just by the way they treat a single sound, I think they might be invited by themselves when they come to more elaborate music to add things.
I couldn't agree more, and I'm so glad you're mentioning Vagaluna and a song by Bellini. One thing that I was going to say actually is that a non-intimidating way to approach these questions on musical grounds without destroying your voice by trying to sing really high notes or endless runs of semiquavers is to look at the songs by these composers. Songs for voice and piano. It's a repertoire on which I'm working a lot right now because we're beginning to prepare the critical edition of Verdi's songs.
Mm-hmm.
And those songs contain a lot of the ingredients that we've been talking about, especially repetition of individual phrases or entire strophes of music. And there you can deploy some of these little devices, really just a passing note, just the substitution of a single note, a puntatura, not in the sense of the big endless high note, but a puntatura in the sense of slightly changing the shape of a phrase will give you a flavor of what this is about. And then there is rhythm, and then there is phrasing. I mean, if you do Vagaluna, which is a wonderful song by Bellini, then the first time, what is it? I hope that I'm remembering the words. Vagaluna che in
argenti
queste rive.
e questi fiori.
We can all sing it together, right? The second time, what are the words? Dille pur che lontananza. For me, the first thing you do is you change the phrasing. That's very painful at that point. The words, tell her that distance cannot heal my pain. So, dille pur che lontananza. Just catch a quick breath before the K. You've already introduced a change. You've already introduced variation without changing a note. Then think about playing a little bit with tempo. Many conductors will kill you on the spot if you try to do that. But I gently try to tell them that it's okay to take a repeat a little bit slower and then maybe pick up tempo gradually. With one tenor once with whom I worked on this aria from Don Pasquale, we actually experimented with the cavaletta, and it was so beautiful. We didn't do anything much with it, but Donizetti writes moderato, which who knows what it means anyway, but we treated that as an allegretto of sorts. So the first time, but then the second time, with the esse fia che ad altro getto, a little bit slower, and then after 4 bars go back to the original tempo.
That's, by the way, something that
you can try. It's like cooking.
Mm.
You may go to a wonderful restaurant, and I have fabulous memories of our dinner in Maastricht with Miriam and Susanne and Axel, and what a meal that was. You don't really try that at home necessarily, but just add a little bit of another spice, or try to cook something at a higher heat, see how that changes the texture. Big change happens with small steps.
And it's important to take the risk to do wrong things. You'll be corrected anyway by somebody.
Absolutely. All of this, of course, needs to be balanced with the concrete needs of the profession. If you have an audition to get a role, just go and get the bloody role. I'm a strong
plan, girls.
that. Do not miss out on a chance because you are standing on principle. Then after you get the role, negotiate. But there is no question that if you're auditioning with a certain type of conductor or artistic director or agent, and you don't have the high D flat at the end of Ernesto's aria, you just don't win the award. You don't get the role. You don't get signed up. So there are two possibilities there. Either you have the D flat or you don't. If you don't, do another piece, if at all possible. And if you do, just do it. Then, when you're on stage and you're actually preparing to Don Pasquale, see what can be negotiated. How much time do you have? Do you have 3 days of rehearsal and then you're on? Then forget it. You just have to do everything very quickly and rely on tradition a great deal. Do you have a month or even 2 months? Like Elisir, when I came to Maastricht, it was so much fun because it was January and we were planning for performances in March, which sadly, as we all know, could not take place. But then you can really explore and have the courage to make the mistakes because you'll fix them the next day or the next week. Come up with something, live with it for a few days, then you might just decide that it doesn't work musically or dramatically, or that it might work for another soprano or another baritone, but it's not for you.
And sometimes you also have a plan B, right? I mean, depending on the shape of the day, you might do the high D in 4 performances in the 5th one. For some reason, you're not in good shape. And you need to, this is just me speaking, you need to have that in your mind when you work on the role, that this day might come and that you know what to do if you feel the high D will not come out on that day. Right. So it's a vocal necessity that you have to take care of without necessarily sacrificing the artistic integrity of what you have been doing.
It functions in both sides. It functions for the high notes as it's also valuable for the low notes. In Semiramide, for the tenor in the 2nd aria, there is a very, 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 very dangerous leap down from a high A down to a low A below the staff. So for a tenor who can sing the high Ds of the 1st aria, that's a really low note. And unfortunately, you're sort of alone on it. So everybody will hear if you miss it. So that's one of the points where you definitely need an alternative puntatura or an alternative way of, turning the phrase, depending on how you feel. I remember myself being very embarrassed singing it on feeling very well on dress rehearsal and going down and being for the first time successful on my low A, and on the premiere making a big step forward to the audience to show off with my low note after all the high ones, and it just didn't come out. It was extremely embarrassing. And that's so also valuable for low notes. If you are tired, if you're not in a good condition, you might lose some of the lower ones also.
Absolutely. You just need to be prepared to pitch. If it rains, you wear just a different pair of shoes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And I'll tell a little story since we've talked about Merlin Horn and you were talking about low notes, Axel. One of my very fond memories as a teenager is that I got to hear Merlin Horn sing Tancredi live. 2 performances. And Tancredi, the role of Tancredi, has this magnificent Gran Scena in Act 2, the cantabile of which is in F. And Merlin Horn, as those of you who know her realize, has hardly ever sung low Fs in public. And so she sang the opening night of this run of performances, it was in Palermo, 1986, if I remember correctly. And she goes through the cantabile, and she sings in a really beautiful middle C, and then goes up. 2 days later, she comes back, and her voice sounds a little bit different, and she seems to have even more of an abundance of resonance in her bottom. And I thought to myself, I bet tonight she's going to do a low F, and she did. It was very satisfying. Very, very, very satisfying. But clearly, you have to have different plans. When you are at the level of experience and artistry of someone like Marilyn Horne, or Axel, or Suzanne, then you don't even think about it. It just comes, okay, on the spur of the moment. And that's when things are really, really, really exciting. But remember, again, you have, on one hand, you have to be brave. You have to just get out there and try things, especially in conservatoire, especially during your training. Because then in your career, depending on which direction you go, there will be a lot of limitations that you'll have to deal with, from the way they make you act to indeed the way you do or don't do cadenzas and variations and puntature. Life can be very restrictive, and that's one of the reasons why I said it's the hardest job in the world. But in conservatoire, it's safe enough for you to try things, and in so doing, develop your confidence, expand your perspectives, your horizons, make your minds and your voices become more flexible. And that's one thing. So be brave. Remember that in conservatoire, we all love you anyway. And the other thing is, remember that, as I said before, and as Axel pointed out by bringing up the wonderful example of Vagaluna by Bellini, you do something small and the effect can be very big. Don't feel that you have to do something absolutely extremely complicated and technically very challenging and dangerous. There is an element of risk-taking at times when you're doing a Rossini cabaletta. There's no denying that. But there is also a lot that you can do with a very simple change in the dynamics or in the phrasing or in the tempo.
Do we have any questions?
Yeah, Eva wants to say something. You are muted, Eva. I think you're muted.
Like this. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, great. Okay. No, I would just like to say that this is how do you call it? Music talk is of great timing for me, because I've just started learning a bel canto piece and caballetta from Bellini.
Curious.
Yeah, it's from Il Pirata.
Okay, final scene.
Col sorriso d'innocenza.
Okay, the mad scene.
Yes, but I just want to say it's very motivating, very exciting to hear you talk about the creativity, and especially when you were speaking about how bel canto in essence is about making the character your own, and completely your own in the way that you put in your creativity. That's very motivating for me to just go and experiment with what I can come up with, basically. Of course, there are a lot of traditions on YouTube to be found.
Oh, absolutely. That's such an incredible role, because on one hand, it's not one of the most popular Bellini operas. On the other hand, Callas has done it, Caballé has done it, and it just goes on and on. René Fleming. So it's overwhelming once you start looking at those models. Also, the way Bellini writes the music, especially the cantabile, might seem very limiting because the coloratura he writes is very detailed, and there is something to be said for that. But look at the recitative, for example. There is so much that you can do with that. And I've never been too happy with what I've heard, to be absolutely
Okay.
not because it wasn't good, but because I always thought that something could be done differently. So maybe you're the one.
Well, that's quite something. But anyway, I really wanted to thank you because this was just very enlightening.
Well,
and I will continue on that.
Follow up, just when you have a recording to share, just send it along, or if you write any recommendation, send it to me by email and I will look at it. Pleasure.
I will. Thank you.
And then we'll talk. And
very nice.
By the way, I got the chance to hear a little bit of your Mahler. Susanne basically, twisted my arm and said, "Oh, you have to."
Okay.
So it was very good. I really loved it. Congratulations.
Thank you very much. So nice.
Great.
Do we have any questions, Miriam, from the people on the live stream who are?
No. I have the feeling everybody is just like drinking your words, as Axel said, and just enjoying, but not many questions. No.
Well, some people may have fallen asleep legitimately as well.
I don't think so.
I don't think so. I don't think so, because as Eva was saying now, I think it's a very uplifting talk. And the thing that now it's my teacher soul speaking again. One thing that I think that makes this kind of experiences even more beautiful is that you are providing our students with tools for really loving in a more deep way the repertoire that they are singing. Because for the example Vaga Luna, when you look at the score, is like, yeah, it's not rocket science. Yeah, it's as Axel said, is 1, 4, 5. Yeah, let's go fast. When it comes to the compositional side, it's not, but it's such a trick that he is playing, because this music is way more complicated than the things that you see there just in a few notes, and you really can learn to love that music if you go beyond the score, as you were suggesting now. So I'm really happy that they are feeling now like, oh wow, it's deeper than I thought. And
thank you, and you're a fabulous teacher. So coming for you, this means a lot.
no, it means
So it might actually be time to wrap up then, and I'm going to end on a deliberately sentimental note. So please don't cry. But what I want to say to you is that even beyond music, we've gone through, and we're still going through, a tremendous crisis on the global level, and all of us are questioning our role in society, our professional present and future. What are we going to do? Are we going to make it? Are we going to earn a living by doing what we love, what we're good at? And these are questions for which, unfortunately, right now, we don't have a clear answer. But I am optimistic, broadly speaking, in that if you continue to do what you do and do what you love, and you are creative about it, that creativity will be needed. I'm not going to lie to you. I don't know how many of you there are out there right now, how many of you are singers. I know, because this is a cruel world, I know that not all of you will sing at the Metropolitan Opera. Not all of you will actually have a leading singer career. But I am confident, one, that all of you will have a very fulfilling life. If you are creative, it will be fulfilling if you teach, it will be fulfilling if you become a writer, if you work for an arts organization as a manager, oh, stop that, Susanne, come on. You will have a very fulfilling life. And more importantly, what you do is going to be needed and is going to be incredibly helpful, essential in reality, as we enter the post-COVID world. Okay, so every time you do a cadenza, you're actually doing a lot more.
What a beautiful thing to say.
Yeah, thank you for these words, Francesco. Thank you for spending your time with us.
Thank you for allowing me to. It's been such a joy. So thank you, and especially the Miriam, Susanne, and Axel. Really,
thank you.
Family, and I cannot wait to see you again and to be allowed to give you a big hug at that point.
And have those cases of wine that are waiting for you. Cases.
Oh, I never say no to that.
I was hoping for that.
So,
We are missing you.
dear students, thank you so much. Thank you for being here. Thank you for the ones on the live stream who are following us. Please be back for next adventures. Once more, Francesco, grazie, grazie tanto. Non ci sono parole per ringraziarti. And we hope so much to see you very soon.
Thanks for being here.
And we'll be following you. Ladies and gentlemen, good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Everybody, grazie Francesco. Mwah, mwah.
Thank you.